So there's a question before us. There is a Buddhist concept of shunya, that is emptiness. And is that in any way compatible with the Vedantic philosophy? And how do we view emptiness? Now, let's go away from Buddhist philosophy, because this term for emptiness could also be translated as nothingness. And that, of course, is just an obvious error, because nothing doesn't exist. When you try and look for nothing, you won't find it. It's not there. And we completely agree and honor and reverence Buddha, Gautama Siddhartha, who became Buddha, because he never had an empty experience. It was a transformational experience. And that is what transformed him into the seeking person, Gautama Siddhartha, of the Shakya clan, into a Buddha, one of enlightened intellect. So clearly there's something positive happened. But then you see the metaphysicians later in the Buddhist schools wanted to take some of Buddha's statements and make some implications which probably Buddha didn't have. For example, he was asked, is there a God? Is there no God? The great silent one of the Shakya clan remained silent. He never pronounced anything. And his method was clinical. Clinical means that if I want to go from here, let us say, or from London, let us say, to Plymouth, then I would, and I've never been there before, let's say, or the other way around is maybe a little bit more interesting for many because it's a bigger place. So you've never been to London, then you have no idea what London is like. Now, in this modern age of good, accurate media, we can do a search, maybe a YouTube search on, London, and we can see the various sites, and somebody can make a commentary and so on. But is it the same as smelling what's going on at the Smithfield market? Is it the same as listening to the traffic, engaging with the people, understanding what it means to live in London, understanding, the sites firsthand? Now, we're very good at secondhand information. There's a kind of joke, of course, two tourists, let us say from Japan, for want of a better analogy, they go to St. Paul's Cathedral in London, and one says, you do the inside, I do the outside. And then they feel they've ticked the box and they've covered it, and they can share their photographs with all their friends and what have you, and say, I have been to London. So sometimes we have substituted real experience, direct real experience, sense experience with the eyes and the ears and the combination of all our experiences, external experiences that connect us with the outside world. And we have substituted this for photographs. And everybody carries a camera around on their phone. The days of using a phone just for phone calls is gone, probably. And everybody immediately takes a photograph, and everybody's engaged in this technology. You go to any public place, let's say an airport, and you sit there, probably 9 people out of 10 are engaged in the media in some form or another, probably the phone. And so it's diverted our attention away from these things. Now, nothingness is become a subject of modern science, because in modern cosmology, when you discuss what is the origin of things, this is a hanging question. And so those people who are interested in cosmological models will assert that nothing made everything out of nothing, and I don't think we can go along with that. And even in the ancient thinkers, we find in the Upanishads this denial of what we might say non-existence. So you cannot get existence from non-existence, and I think we can all agree that we exist. And existence requires sentience, it requires consciousness. And consciousness is obviously a positive thing. So when Shakyamuni, when the silent one of the Shakya clan became Buddha, one of enlightened intellect, he wasn't going into a state of nothingness, but he was going into a state of something that cannot be objectively described. Because the ultimate truth is not an object of our scrutiny. We cannot take the most internal discovery, which we call the divine self, and Vedanta calls it Atman self. We cannot take it and put it in a test tube and see whether it is acid or alkaline. We cannot see how big it is. We cannot see what is its component parts, because not something like that. So the best we can say is it is an entity that is not subject to any spatial dimensions. It's not distributed. It has no parts. It's therefore undivided. The best thing we can say is that for us to register events requires time, and this temporal aspect does not belong to this supreme principle, which in Vedanta is in you and is the same as the universal supreme principle. There's no difference. You cannot have two infinities. And we can say it is unchanging, or we can say it is infinite. At least these three we can say. It's not saying what it is. Why should we not say what it is? Because when you assert something, the temptation really is to put it into streamlined anthropomorphic spatial temporal terms, and this will not be adequate. When the Ramakrishna Paramahansa was asked, what is this Nirukalpa Samadhi like? I'm paraphrasing. He went into this state, this transcendent state, and obviously, because it's transcendent, could not bring it down to a description. He ended up in tears of frustration. See, I tried my hardest to describe it. It's indescribable. Now, the whole object of meditation is that the objects that we are looking at, objects fall into two categories, external and internal. And there are even subcategories, but external are the things that the senses pick up. And we can only have 5 avenues, 5 approaches toward that, because only 5 senses are there. But these 5 senses correspond to subtle waves underlying them. And these combination of waves are what makes our world. No point in asserting that it is thoroughly corpuscular. We understand that from our gut. But we have to maybe more accurately, even theoretically, say, well, it's a series of oscillations, vibrations, waves. And we cannot see these. Now, even in this world, we cannot see the underlying physical reality of what is there. And when we really investigate it, we find it is very ephemeral. So Buddha picked up on this. One of the fundamental cornerstones of Buddhist philosophy would be to say, this whole world, whole world of our experience, external and internal. What is internal? We can watch the mind. We can watch the goings on of thoughts meandering through a kind of framework or field called the mind. We can watch the behaviors that we have. We can watch things surfacing from the habit level up into the conscious mind. All of this we can see. And therefore, that also is an object. And when we run out of objects, we have to resort to something that is a witness, that is a knower, that is a seer. And a seer can never be seen, and a knower can never be known. A witness can never be observed. A thinker can never be thought of in the final analysis. We just have to be content to understand it is just that which sees. And it is that which thinks, and it is that which knows. That's all there is there. And so when all the objects are removed, there is an experiential understanding of something that is described in many different ways, but one description would be fullness. Now, it's not really a good description because it doesn't really tell us anything. It just gives us a concept. And so you might equally say that it is something like emptiness. In other words, there's no semblance of it or resemblance of any of the external objects that we know of in this. But there are some clues. There are resemblances, no doubt, but there are distortions. Now we need to give some examples of that. So, yes, when we empty everything out, then we can say that it is beyond our description. And if this is what is meant by shunya or emptiness, then it is the same thing as fullness. And it is much more positive for us to say fullness, because in fullness, there's no space for anything else. We have never experienced anything. We have no examples, only concepts, representative concepts. But we have no real connection with what is fullness. Because any spatial awareness requires dividedness, not fullness. Any experience is a finite experience. We have nothing to do with infinite. And when we see, if we try to understand even the events going on in the mind that we call thoughts and feelings, then all of this really is within the scope of a measurement. It's like a train going past. We can see, okay, where did it start? When is it arriving in our present awareness? And when is it departing? We can have a memory of its departure. And so a factor of time comes in here. And of course, the interesting question is, how do you get from something that is undivided to dividedness? And how did you get from something that is unchanging to change? And how do you get from infinite to finite? That's a different question. But we have an explanation for it. There must be some kind of clues or resemblances or mirror images in our familiar world that explain the phenomena that we understand in this world. And so that reflection is what we call our world, our familiar world. It is the world of physical reality. It's the world of physics. It's the world of science. And science hasn't gone far enough in their discovery. They're still only exploring phenomena and not what we might call the noumenon, the thing which is unknown. This is, the philosopher Kant's term, the phenomenon, the noumenon. So we can never really understand that if we apply the tools of intellectual discrimination and so on and so forth. These are only things that lead us to a condition of revelation. So what Buddha had was, he had a condition of revelation by having the determination to sit down and be sensible. Sensible means I'm not going to go to any extremes. I've struggled hard to find out what is the truth. I've possibly fasted myself almost to the point of death, and my companions have done this as well. And still I didn't get anywhere. So what will I do? I'll sit down and I'll go into an introspective analysis. And then I'll go beyond that. I'll go to an internal discovery by peeling away the layers of unreality. And what will I find there? At the end of it, something completely indescribable, yet something that gives me a positive transformational experience. And so even the word Buddha does not suggest emptiness. It suggests a fullness. It suggests a transformational shift to something that is shining, an enlightened intellect. It is not an emptiness. Now I know some people have taken it literally in this way. And so, of course, when you study the various commentaries, what we call bhashyas, of one of our principal texts in Vedanta, namely the Brahma Sutras or the Vedanta Sutras. And there you find Shankaracharya's masterly bhashya, masterly commentary. You see, the thing is, there's no such thing as emptiness. There cannot be. Supposing you argue, well, there's an ocean. Supposing we empty the whole water, there'll be nothing there. No. Sand will be there. There'll always be something there. Because you cannot have existence from non-existence. You cannot have something from nothing. And so there are two kind of schools of thought on this, many more probably, but I'll highlight two of them. One is the idea of creation ex nihilo. We make something from nothing. Well, we have no experience or real examples of that. A potter has to have clay to make a pot. And where does God get his material from? It becomes an awkward question. So, granted that it's a human concept, creation is a convenient term to help our understanding because we can't really go beyond the spatial temporal dimensions. Then the next mistake will be, well, if a creator made the world, created the world from nothing, this is an awkward proposition. Then the next thing would be that nothing made everything out of nothing. And this, unfortunately, is currently the scientific cosmological popular model that we have today. And people try and get away from it by redefining what is nothing. There's quite a famous astrophysicist called Leonard Krauss, who's an adamant, vociferous materialist atheist. And understanding the difficulty, tries to shift the definition of nothing. He writes a book which is to do with this. And he tries to redefine nothing as something like a quantum vacuum, but it's just speculation. It's just a story. It has no basis in science. And so we can't even entertain the idea that non-existence made existence or nothing made everything out of nothing. We dismiss that. So do we have a third option? Yes. The third option will be that this is not an actual world. This is not an actual universe, and we are not really dealing with actual science and actual physics. And this is our Vedantic position. Our Vedantic position is, it's not that something made everything out of nothing. It's not that nothing made something out of itself. It is that there is one existence, which is fullness, not emptiness. One existence. And this existence expresses itself through a network, through a mysterious process, an apparitional causation. Things look like something. And how do you get from this reality, which seems to be sit behind everything as it were, how can that be translated? How can that cross a border into what we see and what we measure? Well, there's only one feasible explanation. It's all a mistake. And if we want to live with this mistake and we have no intention of shifting out of the mistake, then we'll be entrenched in the mistake forever. But if we have a willingness and intention to shift away from the mistake and discover something new, then we are what we call on the spiritual path. And the spiritual path is not just an intellectual investigative process. It is none of these, but how do we do this? Now, the simplest possible way in which we can do it will be what Ramakrishna tells us. He's in 1883. Mahendranath, the author of the Gospel of Ramakrishna, what has become to be known as the Gospel of Ramakrishna, what is originally called Kathamrita, is a much more beautiful kind of term for what was recorded and what was spoken. The nectar, the story of nectar through story, or nectar through dialogue, we can say. And so Ramakrishna pays a visit to a certain garden house in Kolkata, and he's celebrating the semi-annual festival of the Brahma Samaj, from which many of his young followers come. And so, which is the way? Or, preceding question, sir, what is the way? Assuming that there is a way that we have to take. Now, we commonly call such a way as an approach or a yoga. When I give these classes to yoga students, I try to tell them, or I begin with the question, what has yoga to do with health and wellness? It seems a curious question for them because they've made an assumption that yoga has everything to do with health and wellness. And they're surprised by the question and more surprised by the answer I give them, which is very little, hardly anything. Then what is yoga? Well, yoga implies that there has to be some union in the face of some disunity. We somehow seem to be separated from an ultimate reality, and there's a desperate natural search for everyone to find it. And this is rooted in evolution, an unfolding of our own true nature. We have to properly understand this term, evolution. I've said many times before that evolution means there is something which is already there, which is, in Swami Vivekananda's language, something that is involved. You cannot have evolution, according to him, without involution. Something must be involved. And a great example is you cannot have a tree evolving from nothing. There has to be something which is potential. And that potentiality sits in the seed. And the seed, simply what we call growth, is just unfolding itself in time and space until we get this grand, grand tree. Huge, huge tree. We would never suspect that the entire thing was tied up, potentially coiled up in a small seed. So something is coiled up within us and within the whole universe, and in the right conditions will unfold, just as a seed in the right conditions will unfold into a tree. And tree is used as a symbol for this whole existence. There's a reason for it. A tree has to have a seed, has to have a root, has to have a knowledge of how to unfold, a sentiency. The sentience part of this is not nothing. It is everything. It has to be everything. And so Buddha understood this because he became Buddha. And while Buddhists might use the language of this nescience or this shunya or this emptiness, it is much, much better probably to understand it as fullness as well as emptiness. That is, you empty out what is the changing, the flux of the universe, and what will you have? You'll have something that is full and free and perfect. You won't have an emptiness there. But it looks like an emptiness. You empty out everything, but there's a big potential error that goes along with this. And that happens in a description of what is meditation. So often you hear, oh, I find it difficult to meditate. Why is that? Because I cannot empty my mind. No, of course you cannot empty your mind. It's not a garbage can that requires emptying. No, it is there to be used. It's a vibrant source of psychic energy. And it is within this psychic energy that we have the capacity for attention. So, what is the practical implication of this? Instead of looking for difficulties in yourself, instead of using this attention for self-criticism and seeing, I'm defective, I'm unhappy, what's the solution, how will I correct it? We can put thoughts on something great. And one is a great suggestion I have. Perhaps, supposing we speculate, what would the world require 2,000 years from now? Let's contemplate on that and see where we go with it. It's nothing to do with emptiness. Why don't we put in pure thoughts, which the Buddha describes as the Eightfold Path: right thinking, right occupation, right meditation, right concentration, etc. 8 of these. Why don't we put in these beautifully pure thoughts, what we call sattvic thoughts, and actions, which don't hurt myself? These are thoughts which don't hurt myself and don't hurt others. Why don't we take up some kind of interest, some hobby? Why don't we learn something new every day? Because what will people do when the added years add up to old age? Then old age is not properly used, and then we become disinterested, demotivated in life. And then the whole physicality breaks down, the mind breaks down, becomes dull. Well, you should have a hobby. You should have it from childhood. You should be curious enough about every aspect of the world to explore everything. And of course, the power of attention doesn't age. It's the one power that we have. These are all positive things, not emptying things. And why don't we learn to like people? The eyes which look at you from a person's eyes are really the eyes of the divine. They are God's eyes looking at you. And instead of keeping burning pains inside, why don't we cry a little? There's nothing wrong with tears. And confide our pains with somebody that we trust. You'll feel better afterwards. Don't keep it all inside. And if not, if you do keep it inside, then illness will occur. And if you dislike someone or a situation, then the body will say, well, I don't like. It'll pick up the theme. And then the heart refuses to pump and the lungs refuse to function, because the discriminating attitude creates dislike in the body. Thereafter, your illness will occur. Anyway, in answer to this question from the Brahma Samaj, in what is the actual way, so the master says this, master meaning the great mystic, 19th century mystic Ramakrishna. He says, attachment to God. Now it's very blunt. This is not politically correct language, seemingly, in today's world and in today's geographical environment, Europe. For example, I just come back from France, and I'm told, don't ever use the word God, because the only religion that the French people is republicanism. Please don't use this word. It's anathema, because it comes with much baggage. But I'm not afraid. I tell them I'm not afraid to use this word God, and Ramakrishna also was not afraid to use an equivalent term. So attachment to, and by God, he means a personal God. Or in other words, love for him. And secondly, prayer. Then the next question, well, which is the way, which is the preferable way? Is it love or prayer? Which one of these two? And first love and then prayer. In other words, what order? Well, first love and secondly prayer. That's a very interesting statement. First, we have to cultivate love. Now, what many people mean by prayer is some kind of petition. I'm in trouble. I need to pray. Bhagavad Gita gives us several types of people like this. When I'm really, really in trouble, desperate, no other way, then I appeal not to emptiness but fullness and try to find some solution beyond my scope. Well, that's better than not doing it at all, but it comes and it goes, and it really has no value. The deeper value, if I want a connection, if I want a real way, a real avenue, not just a something from a universal store to satisfy my immediate temporal need. If I really want it, then first I must cultivate love. Why should we love God? Because God is lovable, and we have to notice it by questioning. What questions should we ask? Who digests my food? How is it that nature is sentient? You see, there's nobody who can tell you where down is. If you really, really want to know where the downward position is, you take a so-called insentient stone or object or weight, let's say lead, put it on an insentient string, and it will tell you accurately where down is. And the implication is that within the string, within the lead, we find some chemical compositions, but these are all really dancing atoms. And atoms, therefore, are sentient. They know where the center of the earth is. They know how to make an arrangement. They know how to make things small. They know how to push out. And all of them operate according to an uncertainty principle. The great physicist Richard Feynman once said that the whole of the fundamental physics that we call quantum mechanics is just a restatement of Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. What do we mean by that? Well, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle says the uncertainty of position times multiplied by the uncertainty of mass and velocity, which we call momentum, cannot be smaller than a certain constant, what we call Planck's constant. And what it means, therefore, is if we have an uncertainty about an electron's position, then we have no idea what it's doing. And if we have an uncertainty about what it's doing, we have no idea where it is. This is just a fact. And this uncertainty cannot be smaller. We can have as much uncertainty as we like. Don't tell me that this is an equation of an actual universe. It is not. It's not an equation of an actual universe. In 1905, the great genius Albert Einstein, he understood that there are no standard ways of looking at things. And so there are no standard, it depends on your observer position. So how can we establish anything that is constant? He came up with a formula. We can only do it by looking at what is the total time-space separation between an emission and absorption event. In other words, between here and there, and then and now, what is the total separation, not the individual one. That's subject to relativity. And then if space and time are equal, then it goes to zero. In other words, if we see the nearest star to us 8.5 light years away, we see it as if it's 8.5 years ago. Everything that we see is in the past. We see it as it's happening now. It goes to zero. Please don't tell me that this is an equation of an actual universe. It is not. And so when Buddha declares and Buddhism declares that this whole universe is something like a flux, they catch on to it. They understand something that is changing is something that is ephemeral. You can't take it seriously, and yet we do. So how to get out of it? This question is raised to the mystic. And the mystic, Ramakrishna, answers, first love God and then pray. And continuing this, he then says, and one must always chant God's name and glories and pray to him. In other words, you must always express what you're feeling inside. It's not a discipline, it's not a struggle. If you really have this love of God through the observation, how this fullness came about and how the expression comes about, then what is the way? You have to chant the divine name with a great deal of feeling, and also the glories. Now, we're not short of glories. Everywhere we look, we find it. We'll find it in a tree and flower. These are the obvious examples. But what about the eyes that see? What about the lungs that move? You see? So all of this is there. And then he says, an old metal pot must be scrubbed every day. What's the use of cleaning it only once? In other words, because our habit level wants to endorse this reality of this world, we have to persuade ourselves by constantly repetition. So cleaning it once won't do it. We know we have to tarnish it. When we do any ritual here, we have to use some copper vessels and what have you. And if we don't clean them immediately, then they oxidize, and we find spots which are difficult to remove. Every time, of course, we can leave it, but every time we have some kind of puja celebration, we have to spend hard elbow grease, as it were, in cleaning the pot again. So the mind will be tarnished. It's like that. It's a receptacle. And not only that, but it's functional. It has a function also. So further, he says, one must practice discrimination or renunciation. What does that mean? You have to always watch out for the things which are wave-like, a flux, according to the Buddhist description. And then what is the solid thing behind it? We can use an example, of course. We can think of an ocean whose depths we cannot fathom. And at the top, we can see all these vacillating waves. We can't catch a grip on it because the waves are unreliable. Waves form because of wind action and a moving current. And so sometimes they may be higher than a ship. Sometimes they may be 6 meters in height and almost overwhelm a ship sailing or going into a storm will be taking a risk because the waves have much more force than the momentum of the boat. So we have to constantly be watchful. And we have to do this in a non-struggling way. We have to do this in a positive way because, you see, positivity will clear the way. But any form of doubt or fear or temptation or struggle will intrinsically be negative. And this discrimination, viveka, will lead you to vairagya, what is called renunciation. Why would we bother with playing with child's toys? If we have discerned that this world is something like a play of waves, then why should we have any serious business in it? Why should we not treat it in the same way? So you must be conscious of the unreality of the world. And if you want to apply the word shunya, we have to be conscious of the emptiness, the hollowness of the world. Yes, in that sense. Wonderful. And then the conversation goes on from there. Is it good to renounce and so on and so forth? Literally renounce the world, that is, take up monastic life in some way or another. And don't forget, monasticism comes from the word mono, means by yourself, means one person, separate from anything else. You're interested in silence rather than talking. You're interested in introspection rather than engaging externally in the world. You are interested in a quiet, peaceful, internal, reflective, peaceful life. Not many people will go for it. So this is what is mentioned in terms of that. Now coming back then, how do we get from this undivided to the dividedness And the typical example always used, and you'll tell me what it is. The typical example is, in the twilight of the day, you go out and there you see something coiled up. And there you jump to a conclusion. It's a dangerous snake about to bite you. And you see its head on the one end and you see its tail on the other end. Now you see, in the light of illumination, the proper understanding, when you remove out, you take away your projection of a snake, you see that the rope was hidden. The hidden element, the projecting element, is necessary in this mistake. And then you see the rope, but you don't see a submarine. You don't see a bus. There must be something, the length of the rope, that indicates a snake. There must be some clue. Now you see, do we have these clues in the universe? And we do. And you see, it doesn't matter what university you go to, no professor will be able to tell you why gravity is there. Why should there be such a thing? Why should books fall to the floor? Or why should your keys fall to the floor? Or why should electrical energy want things to fly off? Why do the electrons sit on the positrons to make things as small as possible and yet have a will to move and space things out, and gravity pulls them in? And why does your car not want to go unless you apply Newton's principle? You push a force to it. If you don't put a force to something, it doesn't go. And then it doesn't wish to stop. You must have noticed. So why is all of this? Well, it's because this undividedness will come out as a wish to bring things in. And when you add these qualities of space and time, what will you have? Dividedness is a spatial problem. And if everything was drawn into one point, then you wouldn't have a universe. It has to be spaced out. And there has to be a force that wants to draw it in. And without gravity, we don't have a universe. That much we know. So you see, it is this seeming dividedness, this seeming change, that is evidence of the unchanging. And this finite universe that we have, the space is expanding. So they say, there's a universe is moving and expanding. So how is this possible? Why should this be so? Well, because this will to go to the infinite. When we say expansion, we're really meaning the finite. And the finite is the evidence of the infinite when we apply conditions to it. So you see, this provides an explanation for the ephemeral world that we have. We can apply this to anything. Now, this whole thing is far from emptiness. The universe is a flux, no doubt, and it is ephemeral, no doubt. It is there as a mistake, no doubt, a wrong way of looking at it, no doubt. What is the way? And the mystic provides a very simple way. First of all, we have to be clever enough to understand its ephemeral nature and its hollowness, which we could then actually call shunya. And then on the one hand, and then on the other hand, we have to apply something positive, an appreciation for the ephemeral as it is, but revaluing it as a kind of play of waves. And whose waves are they? Divine waves, what we can call glories. So the explanation how we love this personal God is provided also. Always chant the name of God. Now, yesterday, of course, we went through the continuing story of Rama, the Ramayana. And I mentioned that how this story of Ram comes out is because a person who was a robber and a murderer decided that he would take a wiser course, and he sought instruction. His habit level came out. He was instructed to repeat Rama, Rama, Rama. He couldn't do it. He had to say Mara, Mara, Mara. that represents all the negative forces we can ever think of. All the doubt and fear and all the things that stimulate poor behavior or, damaging behavior. Can be nothing more damaging than robbing and killing, I'm sure. But sooner or later, by applying some truth, some feeling to it, it comes out as Rama Rama, which is entirely opposite. Everything that represents purity and goodness and firmness and resolve and strength and beauty and love, everything like that. So once the feeling is applied to it, this is the power of a mantra. He was told, if you repeat this mantra Rama, then everything will be revealed to you. And he didn't understand it. So even repeating that, one of the questions I was asked in France when we were on retreat there was, so if you repeat a mantra and you don't know the meaning of the mantra, is it effective? Well, there are many opinions of that. My personal opinion is you have to have a feeling attached to it, and therefore every word has a corresponding, and sound has a corresponding concept to it. So you will make your connection and your discovery by the repetition of it, only by understanding its meaning. But then, if we repeat it and don't understand its meaning, is there any impact whatsoever? And judging from Valmiki's repetition, we have to say, well, yes, eventually the meaning gets revealed to you. So there's probably some value in it. So this is chanting the name of God lovingly, we have to add, and singing the glories. Now, if you go along the road and sing, then people wonder, what's wrong. So singing means an internal upliftment, an internal surge of joy because of you noticing the glories of the divine as the universe. And everywhere you look, you'll find it if you have a will to do it. The question of revaluing nature, what do we call viveka, discrimination, discernment, is actually really a revaluation of things. Instead of looking at things as table, chair, and instead of looking at it as an environment, as a place where you have to struggle with colleagues and are overwhelmed with work, for example, instead of valuing it like that, why don't you revalue it in a different way? Why don't you see these as divine glories expressed in wave form coming out like this? They're a more accurate way of looking at it because this is not an actual universe. It's an apparitional one. You're looking at the snake and not seeing the rope.
Yes, Swamiji, that was really good. I think for me, it's probably pointed out the limitations of language in the sense that the word emptiness, I didn't really like it, whereas I much prefer the word fullness. But that's helped me to understand the idea or the concept of emptiness, that it's not a negative thing. And I think probably that it's wonderful as well to sort of think about not impressing your ego on something. So looking at things for what they truly are rather than trying to know it and trying to name things. And, if we can, and it's easier to do that outwardly. I think for me, the difficulty is to do that inwardly, because when I look inwardly, and again, it's probably a personality thing, I think I know, or I want to name myself or the thoughts as mine rather than seeing the truth of it.
Yes, don't label it as yours, label it as yourself.
Yes. Yeah.
When you repeat that you are the infinite visible, when you repeat that you are immortal, you are one without a second, that you're indestructible, that you're the undivided, you're the unchanging, you're the infinite, all of this assertion. But you see, you have to be careful because when you say, I am, Be careful that the body-mind complex doesn't come into the scene.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the key. that's the tricky bit, isn't it?
Yeah. See, most people, when they say who is the person asking the question, they'll think of the person and their last conversations they had, and what their life looks like, and what they look like, and all the rest of it, and evaluating pluses and minuses and what have you, summarizing it as a character, as a friend or an enemy or whatever category we like to put people into. But you see, we haven't really understood that whatever I have just said is just a combination of divine waves dancing in the cosmic ocean of life. You see the joy in saying that. So there can be no emptying anything. You can't empty anything. So there is no non-existence. It is all existence. That is why the nearest description we have to it, done with an apology, is this existence itself, consciousness itself, and bliss. Because when we get to it, we find it blissful, because it's a unity of existence, and therefore it has to intrinsically be something which has an absence of pain and difficulties and unhappiness. That only arises, fear only arises when there are two or more things going on. And there's only one thing. When you're sleeping peacefully, and you say, I had a happy, peaceful sleep, it's only because there wasn't some second person shouting at you. That's all. Well, we've come to our...
Thank you, Swamiji.
Yes, all good things. So wonderful. Well, Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thanks.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Swami.
Swami.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Swamiji.